Cameron Terrell grew up in Plos Verdes Estates, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the U.S., nestled along California's coastline. It was the kind of place most people dream of living, a quiet community with multi-million-dollar homes and stunning views of the ocean. His parents were successful and well-off. His mom, Debra Terrell, was an interior designer, while his dad, Wayne Terrell, worked in media. Their luxurious lifestyle seemed to promise Cameron a bright future. He attended Plos Verdes High School and was, by all accounts, a decent student. But somewhere along the way, he developed a fascination with gang culture. He even went as far as buying a book about gangs, seemingly captivated by a world completely unlike the privileged one he had grown up in. In 2016, things at home began to unravel, and Cameron started spending time at Jesse Owens Park in South Los Angeles. The park was known as the home turf of the Rollin 90s Crips. Now, the Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips is a well-known gang in South Los Angeles, part of the larger Neighborhood Crips Alliance. Their name often caused confusion because of another gang, the Rollin 90s West Coast Crips. Despite the similar names, they are entirely separate groups. The Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips dominate the area around Jesse Owens Park, stretching between Van Ness and Western Avenue, while the West Coast Crips control a different territory. Some believe the Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips broke away from the Rollin 60s Crips, keeping the Rollin neighborhood Crips name but operating independently. Others said the two gangs had always been separate. According to street lore, the alliance between the Rollin 90s and Rollin 60s started at a party back in 1983. They realized both their gang names ended with 0 and decided to form a bond. This connection even spread to other Crip gangs like the Rollin 40s, creating a network of gangs united under the Rollin identity. The Rollin 90s are highly active in South Los Angeles. Their presence is felt not just in the streets but online, where they flaunt guns, drugs, and their criminal exploits. They have a distinctive style favoring sky blue and dark blue as their colors. Members often wear North Carolina caps because the NC stands for 90 Crips. These symbols aren't just fashion statements, they are territorial markers, meant to intimidate rivals and claim dominance in their neighborhood. Jesse Owens Park and the surrounding streets are essentially their strongholds, but the Rollin 90s are constantly surrounded by other gangs, making the area a dangerous and volatile battleground. In the late 1980s, they were a significant factor in the rise of gang violence in South Central Los Angeles. Locals recalled how the violence caused the murder rate to soar, turning the neighborhood into a war zone. The roots of the violence could be traced back to the late 1970s, when tensions flared between the Rollin 60s Crips and the 8-Tray Gangster Crips. The rivalry reportedly started over something as simple and as dramatic as a fight over a girl. This feud created a deep divide, forcing other gangs to pick sides. The Rollin 90s aligned with the Rollin 60s, solidifying their bond. Unfortunately, this allegiance brought them into direct conflict with the 8-Tray Gangster Crips. The rivalry led to numerous arrests and deaths, and by the late 1990s, many members of the Rollin 90s were behind bars as a result of their battles with rival gangs. This same rivalry would later see Cameron Terrell being accused of murder. On the morning of Sunday, October 1st, 2017, at around 11:26 a.m., Cameron drove two gang members into rival territory in his dad's black Mercedes-Benz. The destination? The area controlled by the 8-Tray Gangster Crips, a rival gang. Cameron later claimed he thought the purpose of the trip was to spray graffiti, but what happened next changed everything. While Cameron waited in the car, the two other gang members got out and approached a young man named Justin Holmes, who was walking with two friends. One of them asked Holmes, "What gang are you from?" Holmes' friends ran, leaving him alone to face the confrontation. Holmes, just 21 years old, said he wasn't in a gang, but that didn't matter. One of the gang members pulled out a gun and shot him. The pair ran back to Cameron's car and they sped off. Justin Holmes was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He had been shot in the back and didn't survive. Nearby surveillance cameras captured two teenagers jumping into a black Mercedes-Benz immediately after the shooting. Investigators tracked the car, discovering it belonged to Cameron Terrell's father. Cameron Terrell, just 19 years old at the time, was arrested and held in jail, though police initially withheld the specific charges against him. As they investigated the murder of 21-year-old Justin Holmes, they uncovered evidence that linked Terrell to a string of serious crimes from his teenage years. These discoveries led to an ongoing case complicated by his status as a minor when the alleged crimes occurred. Terrell's lawyer told the Los Angeles Times that his client was suspected of carjacking, among other offenses. However, the case was delayed because the charges related to the carjacking and the murder couldn't be tried simultaneously. Police believed Holmes' murder was gang-related, even though Holmes himself and his friends had no known gang affiliations. During their investigation, they found further evidence implicating Terrell in other crimes. Yet, the system's legal limitations prevented them from pursuing these charges alongside the murder trial. Shockingly, Terrell was released on a $5 million bail just 7 days after his arrest, a privilege that his alleged co-defendants, both juveniles, were denied. John Raffling, a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch, pointed out how unusual it was for someone accused of a gang-related murder to be granted bail, let alone so quickly. Raffling highlighted the glaring inequities in the bail system. Wealth determines freedom, he said, explaining how affluent individuals like Terrell, whose wealthy family easily posted bail, often enjoy privileges that are out of reach for poorer defendants. This gave Terrell a significant advantage in court, allowing him to prepare for his trial in comfort rather than behind bars. Still, Raffling reminded the public that Terrell was innocent until proven guilty. While the police asserted that he was affiliated with a gang and involved in a gang-related killing, Raffling cautioned that such claims are often exaggerated. Journalist Jasmine Canick took a stronger stance, criticizing what she described as a double standard in the justice system. When white people are accused of murder, they're often given the benefit of the doubt, but Black and Latino suspects don't get the same treatment. Terrell should still be in jail like anyone else accused of murder, she said. Perhaps most surprising was the revelation that Terrell was allowed to return to school while awaiting trial. Officials confirmed that he had been attending classes, even as parents and community members expressed outrage. Concerned about their children's safety, parents protested outside the school and demanded that Terrell be removed from campus. Their pressure eventually led to a decision. Terrell would no longer attend in-person classes and would instead transition to learning from home. The school superintendent explained, "This was the best decision for everyone, including Cameron." A few weeks later, prosecutors officially charged Terrell with murder and attempted murder. Meanwhile, the legal process continued for his co-defendants as the courts deliberated whether to try them as adults or juveniles. Court documents revealed that Terrell went by the nickname White Boy and was believed to have ties to the Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips, a claim that shocked many, given his upbringing in a rich neighborhood. The news of a wealthy white teenager's alleged involvement in the murder of a young Black man sent shockwaves through the community. People questioned how such a tragedy could happen and speculated about what might come next. At the preliminary hearing, a detective testified that he believed Terrell was a member of the Rollin 90s neighborhood Crips and argued that the shooting was carried out to benefit the gang. The prosecution presented a photograph of individuals flashing gang signs, claiming that Terrell was in the picture, further tying him to the gang. In the end, the judge ruled that there was enough evidence to proceed. Cameron Terrell would face trial before a jury. The prosecution alleged that Terrell had joined the Rollin 90s Crips and drove two other gang members into rival territory. The group reportedly confronted Justin Holmes, and in broad daylight, Holmes was shot and killed. Terrell first came onto the police's radar in the spring of 2017 when he was spotted hanging out at Jesse Owens Park, known as the headquarters for the Rollin 90s Crips. However, investigators suspected his association with the gang might have started earlier, with some of his online posts hinting at his involvement. During the trial, Terrell admitted he was the driver on the day of the shooting. Surveillance footage even showed his father's Mercedes at the scene. The case hinged on whether Terrell knew what the other gang members planned to do. His defense team argued he believed they were just going to vandalize property with graffiti. According to his lawyer, Terrell had no idea anyone was carrying a gun and didn't expect the encounter to escalate into violence. The prosecution painted a very different picture, claiming Terrell was deeply involved in the gang. They alleged that he and the other members intentionally drove to rival territory to confront a group, including Justin Holmes. When asked if he was in a gang, Holmes had reportedly denied any affiliation, but one of the gang members still shot him. Afterward, the group fled back to Terrell's car and drove away. Holmes, it turned out, wasn't involved in any gang activity. He was a young man working at U-Haul and was simply enjoying his weekend off when his life was tragically cut short. His family chose not to speak to the media during the trial, leaving the prosecutor to emphasize how senseless and unprovoked the killing had been. The defense claimed Terrell was a troubled teen from a privileged home, struggling with family issues. His lawyer described him as a stereotypical rich kid driving an expensive car, someone who tried to impress others by hanging out with gang members at Jesse Owens Park. According to the defense, Terrell wasn't trying to become a gangster. He was simply fascinated by gang culture and wanted to fit in. Evidence presented during the trial showed just how far Terrell had gone to immerse himself in that world. The prosecution displayed photos and videos of him wearing gang colors, throwing gang signs, and even rapping about violence. They revealed a t-shirt with "Milk" written on the back, said to be his gang nickname. They also played rap videos where Terrell was referred to as "White Boy" and "Milk." In one video, recorded after Holmes' death, Terrell rapped about needing to kill someone, which prosecutors argued demonstrated his intent and loyalty to the gang. Terrell's defense insisted all of this was performative. His lawyer claimed Terrell wasn't a criminal, but rather a kid trying to understand and connect with a world far removed from his own. They even brought in witnesses who vouched for Terrell's character, saying they couldn't imagine him hurting anyone. One piece of evidence that stood out was a tattoo Terrell had, a W that the prosecution claimed symbolized his gang affiliation. The defense argued it was simply a tribute to his favorite basketball player, Kevin Durant, who had the same tattoo. While Terrell didn't pull the trigger, the prosecution argued he was complicit. They said he knew what the other gang members intended to do, pointing to how he parked the car a short distance from the crime scene as if anticipating trouble. They also played a video Terrell took after the murder, where he appeared to be bragging about what had happened, calling it an attempt to prove his loyalty to the gang. Perhaps the most haunting evidence was a video of Terrell and others kicking over candles at Justin Holmes' memorial. The prosecutor emphasized that Holmes wasn't a gang member, but an innocent victim of senseless violence. After 10 days of deliberation, the jury ultimately found Cameron Terrell not guilty. The other two teenagers involved in the shooting were set to be tried as adults. The courtroom was heavy with tension after the jury announced their decision, not guilty. The prosecutor remained seated, staring blankly as if frozen in disbelief. Across the room, the victims' family silently gathered their belongings, their grief obvious as they left the courtroom with tears in their eyes. Terrell sat in his suit, staring straight ahead, expressionless, as the verdict was read. His lawyer placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, seemingly unfazed by the weight of the moment. For him, this was just another victory. He later criticized the prosecution for building their case on Terrell's social media posts and rap videos rather than concrete evidence. He argued that Terrell was never a participant in the crime, only a bystander who happened to be there at the wrong time. The defense leaned heavily on Terrell's background, portraying him as a young man from a privileged family who had everything to lose. His elite education and clean-cut appearance made him an unlikely figure in a case centered on gang violence. Terrell's lawyer claimed that the media sensationalized his involvement simply because it made for a compelling story, but the evidence, he claimed, never truly implicated his client. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, public opinion told a different story. Many people saw the verdict as yet another example of privilege tilting the scales of justice. Comparisons to high-profile cases like Brock Turner's were quick to surface, with many drawing attention to the big difference in how black and white defendants are treated in similar situations. Social media was flooded with accusations that Terrell had escaped justice, while countless black men languished in prison for far less. Some believe Terrell's whiteness and wealthy upbringing played a pivotal role in his acquittal. However, his lawyer, a black man himself, argued otherwise. He claimed the prosecution overreached, failing to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Terrell was involved. While acknowledging that minorities often face harsher judgments in the justice system, he maintained that this particular case came down to weak evidence, not race. Jody Armour, a law professor, pointed to studies showing how racial bias skews judgments in criminal cases. Black defendants, he said, are frequently perceived as inherently dangerous, while white defendants are often viewed as victims of circumstance. Activist Melvin Farmer echoed these sentiments, expressing frustration that two black teenagers in the same situation would likely be staring at life sentences instead of freedom. Terrell's privilege was impossible to ignore. His family's wealth allowed them to post a $5 million bail, meaning he was free to go home every night during the trial. Jurors often saw him walking near the courthouse, appearing calm and approachable. Even his lawyer later admitted that being out on bail was a huge advantage, as it allowed jurors to see him as an ordinary young man rather than a criminal. He also had access to a top-tier legal defense, unlike many defendants who must rely on overburdened public defenders. And unlike the stereotypical image of a gang member, Terrell looked polished, respectable, and unthreatening, a factor that likely influenced how the jury perceived him. Former prosecutor Josh Ritter believed the acquittal wasn't solely about race. He described the case as complex, with evidence that didn't clearly connect Terrell to the crime. In such cases, juries often struggle with the legal intricacies, particularly when the defendant comes from a background like Terrell's, where innocence is often assumed. Legal expert Alex Alonso wasn't surprised by the verdict either, though he placed the blame squarely on the prosecution. According to him, their failure to present a compelling case left the jury with little choice. He pointed to similar cases, including one involving a young black man who was acquitted despite driving a car involved in a shooting, as proof that outcomes like Terrell's weren't entirely unprecedented. Still, others couldn't ignore the disparities. Lawrence Bowie, whose son was one of the teenagers also charged in the case, believed Terrell's race and privilege allowed him to avoid harsher consequences. Bowie recounted how Terrell, with his expensive Mercedes-Benz, stood out in their neighborhood but was still accepted by the community. He was frustrated that Terrell could return to his life while his own son remained in juvenile detention, grappling with trauma from past tragedies. Bowie expressed sympathy for the victim's family, having experienced profound loss himself when a fire claimed the lives of his daughter and granddaughter, but his frustration boiled over as he questioned why his son was being punished so harshly while Terrell walked free. In the neighborhood where the crime took place, people who knew Terrell described him as a regular presence. A former gang member working to keep local kids out of trouble recalled seeing Terrell often. To him, Terrell's ability to move between the rough streets and his sheltered life in Plos Verdes highlighted the privilege he carried with him. In the wake of the trial, Terrell announced plans to study law at a university in Houston. He said the case had sparked a genuine interest in the legal system. While he expressed sympathy for the victim's family and claimed to pray for them every night, his closing remarks were defiant. He maintained that only God knew what truly happened that day and that he owed no explanations to anyone. While everything was unfolding, he managed to graduate from high school. Now he's trying to piece his life back together, attending college in Houston and working toward a sense of normalcy. His lawyer shared he's trying to move on with his life, though his family has chosen to stay quiet, avoiding the media spotlight. But not everyone has been supportive of Terrell's lawyer, Mr. Blacknell. Some in the black community criticized him, believing he shouldn't have defended Terrell. Blacknell responded firmly, saying, "The solution isn't to treat white people unfairly. The system needs to treat everyone fairly, regardless of their race." It's a sentiment that cuts to the heart of the larger issues at play. Now, California lawmakers are pushing for change with a new bill, SB 1437, which could reshape cases like Terrell's. The bill aims to prevent people from being convicted of murder solely because they were with someone who pulled the trigger. Terrell's lawyer argued that his client didn't even know his friends planned to shoot anyone. Terrell himself claimed he thought they were only going to spray paint rival gang territory. If this new bill passes, it would change the game. The law would say that you can only be convicted of murder if you actually intended to kill someone. It wouldn't apply to people who just helped commit the crime unless they knew a killing was going to happen and didn't care. Appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.